Good morning, golf fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with our weekend review stream. Out here a little bit early, right? A little bit earlier than I'm used to waking up, but it's a major championship week, so waking up early, not nearly as difficult as it might be for most. Super stoked for what we're going to get to up there in Rochester. But before we turn the page to our next major, going to break down what happened from this week of action at the Byron Nelson, and if there's any key takeaways that we can use going forward. So welcome on in. We're going to roast a few lineups out there. We're going to, of course, review them too, give you guys some feedback. I got absolutely cooked in PGA DFS this week. So we'll be doing plenty of roasting on my own lineups, trying to pick them apart, figure out what went wrong. And then if you guys have any for me too, we'll look at the community contest, any lineups that you guys have for me down in the live chat, any outright bets, props that you want me to look at. It's your time. So welcome on in. Grab your coffee. I've got my Dunkin' Donuts over here, trying to wake up a little bit. So let's get this thing started with a look at the community contest. We'll start with more of the positive end, and then we'll start to roast some of my lineups, which will be a hoop here in a little bit. So first off, we had POZ1171 take down the community contest with a lineup that really wasn't that great, right? 560 points. The reason why I say that is your GPP winner rate was 756 points. So it was a clear 200 points off of the optimal, yet it still took down this single entry contest. I point that out because a lot of your top end scores outside of a Scotty Scheffler, Jason Day, who got quite a bit of ownership. That's why I put them at the on the banner there, right? I played neither of them. Both of them went off this week. And outside of that, a bunch of guys that were really low owned, right? Doug Gim was 2.8% owned. Obviously, he had a 5 of 6 here, but Vincent Norman didn't get that much attention here. And if you look at some of the other lineups towards the top, I mean, it's a lot of just low-owned players that were hardly used, right? And in fact, a lot of them were only used one time in this kind of a contest. You can see Taylor Montgomery, right? Even though he was a core play, didn't get that much ownership. And if we go over here to the large field GPP, you can see the GPP winner, right? It was Scotty, J-Day, like I mentioned, and then 4 players that were sub 5% owned. So it was a week for the pivots, I would say, except for maybe some of the top end players, because you can see, right, Vince Norman. I mean, even Jimmy Walker, I would say, he was a little bit more chalky than most, right? That was by far the worst player in this lineup, right? It's not like you had to have him to be optimal. Most of the guys that you absolutely had to have were like 1% owned Austin Eckroat. It was like 6% owned Ryan Palmer, who that was way higher ownership than I was expecting. I mean, the guy has not been in form for quite some time. And yeah, that 6% got there. So you can see Sung-Yul No, right, 0.7% owned. But yeah, most of them just had Scotty, or at least, Terrell Haddon and Jason Day up top. Have to say, Jason Day, I was rooting for him there on Sunday. My lineups never had a shot, as you'll see here in a second. So my focus changed really quickly from my personal DFS to what I wanted to see happen from a storyline perspective. And I have to say, Jason Day, right, really good feel-good story. I mean, he lost his mother a little bit over a year ago. I'm not going to go into my own personal story, but I can very much so empathize with that. So for him to go out there on a day where I'm sure his mother was on his mind, go out there, have success, even more so a great thing for me. I mean, that's really difficult. I can just tell you, as somebody that can really empathize there, you're thinking about that when you're out there on the golf course. The first few years after a personal tragedy like that, when you get to that kind of a day, it's really going to be on your mind. You actually heard that from him in one of his pre-round interviews, which was not great to hear as a Jason Day fan. I didn't think it was going to go all that well for him, but I'm really, really glad that he pulled that off. That it was almost like his destiny, right? It was there on Mother's Day. 5 years. It's a golf course that he's won at before, right? I have to say, I felt really good about that, seeing that. All right, let's go through a few of the other lineups here. So we had POZ win the contest. We have LSU Nick, who I know pops in here every once in a while. Finished in third. He had a 6 of 6 lineup. There weren't many 6 of 6s when it came to the community contest. So he played Stevens. Stevens was a little bit lower owned to this contest than most. I like that. He was a little bit chalkier in GPP stuff. So a lot of, the people playing the game theory aspect wouldn't take him in this kind of contest. So I like your thinking there. Went way off the reservation with an Aaron Wise. And then outside of that, all reasonable play. So I like that. Ojo King, I know he pops in here every once in a while too. Kevin Chappell missed the cut. 11% owned. That surprises me, right? That's a byproduct of just playing in one of these niche contests. But I like your lineup construction here, right? Seabass got some ownership. Like these top three guys, they were just always going to get ownership because I was on them. I believe this might have been a tee time stack. Now that I'm thinking about it, I know the top three were all AM tee times. I believe Brandon Wu was 2. So yeah, if you were going with a tee time stack there too, I agree with you. I went with that same strategy. Unfortunately, did not work out this week. Let's look at Corey Graves. I know he's popping in here all the time too. We have 2 of the Koreans up top. Okay, we have Tom Hoagie there at $8,500. Ramlet $7,900. And so I like this kind of lineup too. So this may have also been a tee time stack. Tom Hoagie, actually no. Tom Hoagie was out of the other wave. I still like what you're doing there. Nice. Let's look at my lineup. So let's get down to that. I did have a 5 of 6 in the community contest. So this wasn't one of my worst lineups of the week, luckily. Also, it actually was one of my best, unfortunately. Minwoo Lee was my one missed cut. Of course, a core play that I didn't get through the weekend. So that was about 45% of my exposure right there through the toilet, which was not great. But Matt Kuchar, 43rd. Not really going to get it done. Tom Kim, right, hardly made it through the cut. That's not going to get it done, especially when you have a J day. Guys like Scotty Scheffler up top scoring a bunch of points. I was okay with Hadwin. He made a bunch of birdies, right? 18 on the week. That's pretty decent for $8,000. Mackenzie Hughes played fantastically the first 3 days. I was pretty happy with that. And then Matthew Neesmith, relatively low-owned flyer play. I don't know. The guys didn't bring their top end upside, right? Like guys just hardly made the cut. Minwoo looked great after round 1 and then just fell apart. It was just, these guys all spun their wheels. And I played a bunch of all 6 of these players. This is the issue, right? I played like 30% Hadwin this week. We'll talk about my exposure later. Matt Kuchar, I believe I played like 35% of him in my lineups this week. So when they're finishing 34th, 43rd, that's okay for a single entry. It's okay for even this kind of contest, right? I finished in 11th place. That was like 3 spots out of the money. 2 spots out of the money actually there in 11th place. It was okay for this kind of lineup, right? But I needed at least that one spike performance to get up there and into the cash. So I don't know. Not my worst lineup of the week, we'll say that. We'll definitely be able to roast a few here in a second. We have a chat down there. Made you a whole 0.3 profit in the community contest. Yeah, it's better than losing $1 though. Jason Day got you paid. Yeah, Jason Day and Sungyeol No, hell of a week. First off, no. Shooting the -10 after round 1. That was outrageous. And yeah, like I said with Jason Day, it was a matter of time for him to win. If I was going to lose money on anyone in DFS, I'm glad that it was Jason Day. Let me just say that much. Let's roast my exposure. So in my 150 lineups, I made $175 back. And my best lineup finished in 1900th place. That is dreadful. That is as bad as it's going to get. So honestly, I think after the first day, the next time that I checked my Draftkings app to even look at my exposure, at least for main slate, right? Showdown, we made all of our money back and more over the weekend. So I guess I'll show you guys some of that. But I didn't check my main slate stuff since Thursday. It wasn't going to go well. The main reason for that is I was playing a huge tee time wave, right? I was going after all the AM, PM guys. And the thing is that was bared out. Let me actually just bring it up and show you. This is why it's so frustrating. I had the right idea. I just didn't execute it correctly. And that's what I think we need to learn here from my exposure. So let's bring it up. All right, here we go. So I'm going to bring up the hole by hole stats. 4 under par scoring average on Sunday. That was outrageous. Really helped us out for the prop side. So that was pretty cool. But let's look at Thursday, because what I was trying to do with my exposure, right, is I was going after the AM PM guys. So I took these guys that played in -2.3 conditions, as opposed to the -1.3. And then over here for the next day, you can see there was about a 0.5 shot difference, right? About half a stroke. So they got a whole half a stroke advantage. Well, the issue is that on Friday, it was supposed to be flipped, right? The winds were higher in the morning and then lower in the afternoon. And then when we got to Friday, well, that ended up flipping, right? It ended up turning out to be like a normal day out there in Texas, where the winds were relatively flat, maybe slightly higher, right, in the PM hours. So that flipped that advantage a little bit. So rather than, let's say, a stroke and a half, maybe even a 2-stroke advantage that we were looking at there, it flipped the other direction. So that was not ideal. The other not ideal part was that if you look at the Thursday scores, what Scotty Scheffler shot 7 under par. You had a bunch of guys like Jason Day, I believe, shot 7 under par his first day. A lot of these PM Wave golfers that were playing in conditions that were only 1.3 shots under par nuked to the golf course, right? And then here on Sunday, right? Sunday was a 4 under par scoring average, right? This is what I want to point out. This was a 4 under par scoring average at Sunday. Like, sure, Jason Day went off, but like Scotty shot -6, right? Only 2 shots better. Most of these guys up there, right, shot the same kind of scores that they did on Thursday. They just went off, right? In terms of shots gained, they were gaining like 5-6 shots to the field there on Thursday in the harder weather. They just had ceiling of all ceiling performances. So that's how guys like a Jason Day, right, Scotty Scheffler, found themselves in contention even out of the bad wave. So I should have seen that coming. This is why I say I didn't execute it correctly. Right down low, a lot of the guys that are towards the top, right, were guys that were in our wave, right, in the AMPM, right? Austin Eckroat, for example. CT Pan was in that wave. Marty Dow was also in the correct wave. Vincent Norman was. Like, most of the value plays that are in the top, T23 or better on this leaderboard came out of that wave. It's that the players, Jason Day, Siwoo Kim was another one, right? He was also a PM AM wave golfer. Now, he was a core play, so we weren't completely off of him there. Did have an outright on Siwoo Kim. But a lot of these top end players, right? Scotty Scheffler was out of the PM wave. Adam Scott, I believe, was the only like AM wave golfer that you see up here on top of a Terrell Hatton. And in large field GPPs, I know the point difference wasn't that large between guys like a Siwoo, a Jason Day, and Terrell Hatton. But when you're playing against 50,000 other entries, that 20 points really matters. And that's why my best lineup, right, finished in 1900th place. We took that, weather advantage, tried to run with it, and it got thrown back in our face. And that's going to happen sometimes. So that's why I stopped watching after Thursday. I already knew I was done for. Like, I played the weather edge and it got thrown back in my face. So I just I moved on to other things, mostly props. We spent a lot of times on props this weekend. We made a little bit over $8,000 on that end in terms of our prop exposure. So and in the showdown, we 2x'd on Friday, we 3x'd on Saturday, and then yesterday I had another 1.9x day. So we made up for this exposure, but I wanted to forget about it pretty quickly. My top lineups mostly had Adam Scott play pretty well, right? Top 8, okay. T5 for Terrell Hatton, right? Not so bad. And then value plays that were okay, right? T14, T23. The missing factors were those 20 points from the Scotty, Jason Days of the world. I think it's like a 30-point difference between Jason Day. And then maybe getting the Vincent Normans down there or the Austin Eckroats into some of my top lineups. That was what I was missing out on. So it wasn't drastic, but the results look a little bit worse than maybe the player poll really was. And see a 6 of 6 here. Same kind of thing, right? Just lacking top end upside. Like, Tom Kim killed me. You can see he's in a bunch of these top lineups. Matt Kuchar, right, was another guy I took in that 9K range. He absolutely killed a lot of these lineups. Just, not good, Bob. Not what you want to see. This is not how you're going to take down a GPP. And the ownership numbers, I have to say, weren't crazy. I guess Adam Scott was a little bit higher than I was expecting, 20.4%. When we bring up the projections here in a second, we'll go through some of those differences and maybe why some of those players got steamed. But yeah, that's worth noting, right? 20% there. Even 18% Kuchar might have been a little bit higher than some were expecting. Let's see. And I know the 38.4%. Let's see. What was the exact ownership on Scotty? I believe it was like 38%. Yeah, 38.3%. That was actually even a little bit lower than I think some people were expecting. So we'll hop into that here in a second after we look at some lineups. Let's see what's going on down there. Any lineups to review? If you guys want your lineups reviewed, remember, just throw them down in chat or send me a reminder and we'll look into them. But what I want to do now is take a look at this ownership. So a few things to point out. These AM wave golfers, right? So that tee time advantage I was talking about, a lot of other people saw that. And we've looked at this in the past. There's usually a tangible impact on the ownership. And that's kind of what you saw, right? So Tom Kim came in a little bit higher owned. You could see about 4.6% higher owned than we thought. Adam Scott, same kind of thing. Let's see, Matt Kuchar, another AM wave golfer, was only 1.4%, but he was also still higher owned than we were expecting. Let's see, Seamus Power was a PM wave golfer, so we were just a little bit off with that projection. But you can see some of the lower owned players, right? Like, look at this, Maverick Neely, right? He was PM wave, 5% lower than we expected. Benny Ann, right? 6% lower than we expected. He was also a PM wave golfer, it's not every single player that you can say this for, but in general, right? These PM wave golfers were under projected, and some of the AM wave golfers were over projected. And a lot of that is just because of that tee time advantage, right? It's hard to incorporate that into these ownership projections. And that's why I try to point this out, right? Over the last few months, and I've pointed this out even just on our weekly live streams, that the weather impacts ownership. And there's a certain point that you've got to, ride there where the advantage that you're getting from the weather is being made up for by the ownership that those players are getting in addition to what they would normally be at. And if that ownership bump, let's say like it's 6-7% for everyone in that wave, well, maybe it's not worth getting to those players if they're only getting a half a stroke advantage, right? Like this week, it was a half a stroke advantage. And you're talking about 5-6% swings in terms of your ownership. I mean, like guys that are 5-6% lower under this 8K range that you can get to as pivots. Well, then maybe you just want to bet against the weather edge, right? Because these weathermen are slapdicks, right? Like they got it wrong this week. They've gotten it wrong a million times in the past. It's very likely that they're going to get it wrong more than the right going forward. And just something to think about is maybe you play the other side of these weather edges. I mean, look at this. Siwoo Kim was 6% lower owned than he should have been because he was in the PM wave. I mean, that's outrageous. He was 8% owned because of that, making him, I would say, probably the best play on the slate, right? Given the ownership, price tag, his upside, all of that. I mean, obviously almost won the damn golf tournament at this point, and he was 8.5% owned. It's just, I think that's something that we have to consider going forward. Like, even when there's going to be this quote unquote edge to be had, well, maybe we let a lot of the public make that decision and we bet against it. Because, like I said, those weathermen are absolute slapdicks there. So we got a comment from T Sweaty. Does your book coming out talk about how to calculate ownership projections? You started your own NASCAR DFS model. So it's more of a generalistic thing. And great, reminder there. I'm supposed to plug this on all my content this week. Yeah, my book is coming out on pre-order on Thursday. So you may have seen a tweet about it. You may have seen it over there on the Discord. It's more about the general process of modeling than it is about actually like calculating ownership projections. So essentially what you can do with the book is whether you're doing NASCAR DFS, MLB, football would probably be a little bit more complicated, but one of the more simple to model sports when it comes to DFS, you'll have a really good idea of how to do that. Whether it's characterizing your top plays of the week, whether it's going out there and doing ownership modeling, it's more generalistic, right? Like I don't talk about, there's not like a chapter on ownership projections, for example. It's a little bit more general so that it can touch more people. Because ownership projections are so different by sport, right? Like there's so many nuances, so many little intricacies that you have to consider for each sport. Like there's different roster sizes, right? That has a lot to do with it. There's different roles for like how many teams you can have in lineups, all that sort of stuff. So I didn't do it based on sport, but I did it generally. So hopefully it helps you there. I think it will. I think it'll help you with those ownership projections. All right, let's talk through a few other things I noticed. So the weather wave edge, right? That kept us off of Jason Day, kept us off of Scotty Scheffler. And honestly, those 121 points from Scotty, you didn't have to have, right? A lot of those top lineups did, because again, perfect lineups almost never take down GPPs. Terrell Hatton, right, scored more points, was also cheaper. So in my opinion, I think the fate of Scotty went pretty well this week. The fate of Jason Day did not, though, right? 145 points. There's no way to escape that, especially because he's only $9,400. So you absolutely had to have a Jason Day. If you were looking for the optimal lineup, I believe it probably started Terrell Hatton, Jason Day, and then your third man in. I don't know if you could fit a Siwoo Kim because a lot of your next tier of scorers were here in the 8K range. So I believe your optimal may have actually it might have been Jason Day, Siwoo Kim, and then jamming in these 8K players, right? So a Seamus, a Benny Ann. Down here, who is it? Steven Yeager, right? He got 105 points. That was very likely to be your perfect lineup this week. And I say Mackenzie Hughes, right? 108 points. He was probably a part of that. Vincent Norman, I guess. Right, he was only 4.3% owned. So yeah, he could have also been in that sort of lineup. Oh, Austin Eckler, I forgot about that. 137.5 points. So you can tell a lot of these lineups that were taking home contests were nowhere near perfect, right? Let me remind you. Let's just bring that up once again. It was like 760 points that actually won the $5 GPP this week. And that's nowhere near perfect. I mean, look at this. It did have Norman, right? It did have Eckroat, but it had Scotty instead of going a little bit cheaper. And then all those 8K options, right, that scored much better than a Doug Gim weren't even in that lineup. So that's just, I think that's where, and he won by 36 points. That's crazy. He won by 36 points. So once isn't even close. And your next best lineup's even worse, right? It does have Norman. It does have Eckroat. I mean, it does have these top two guys, but like Adam Scott was nowhere near optimal. And Jimmy Walker, right, only scored 73 fantasy points. I mean, finished T74, like near that last place there. That's crazy. It was not a good week for PGA DFS. Let's just say that. Normally, we get a little bit closer to the optimal lineup when there's 71,000 entries in a contest, but that was not the case this week. And that's honestly one of the bigger disparities that I've seen between the true optimal lineup and then what actually took home a GPP. Oh, look at that. Look who I've got here. My cat decided to come say hello. Where's that? Figured I'd let her get her spotlight there for a second. Let's hop back into these projections. All right, so down in this 7K range, what are you doing over there? She's just trying to steal a spotlight over here. Here in this like 6K range, there was like no real chalk. Ownership was spread out pretty well. The only piece that was a little bit higher end than I thought was an Aaron Baddeley. A lot of that's name recognition, right? He was by far the best player in that range. So I suppose it makes sense. Carson Young was actually lower owned than I expected, which I think might have been because he was a PM wave tee time. And I believe Baddeley was AM wave, if my memory serves me correctly. Yeah, he was. So people that wanted to play Carson Young, right, who's been pretty well of late, well, they went to Aaron Baddeley because he was in the AM wave. So just another example, at least in my opinion, of the waves impacting ownership. Micheluzzi was AM wave. A bunch of the touts talked him up as a high upside player, right? Made the cut. I liked that. But he came in 4.5% owned. If he was a PM wave golfer, I bet you would have been a lot lower than that. And then nothing else sticks out. Everything else within like 0.3, 0.4% when it comes to the ownership. And yeah, smooth sailing. Not a lot of huge scores down here. I would say like CT Pan, Marty Dow, probably the big outliers, I would say, when it comes to the scores, but you absolutely didn't have to have them, right? Most of these top lineups, they were Eckroat lineups. They were Vincent Norman lineups, right? Up here in the 7K range. You really didn't have to get cute and take any 6K golfers to find some success. This cat is really being crazy right now. She's hopping on my keyboard right now, trying to like unplug my shit. Still no glass case for the Pickett helmet. No, we're just letting it free ball right now. We're giving it a little bit of freedom, a little bit of air to breathe out there as it stands. Alrighty, guys, that's going to be it for the stream. I guess some final parting notes before we hop on out of here, right? These weather edges, they're fickle, right? I played one this week and got my ass handed to me, but they're also impacting ownership. So I think going forward, we're going to have to ask ourselves if, some of these weather edges are even worth exploring, right? If we're going to see such inflated ownership numbers on one end or the other. Second takeaway, this is more personal for me, would be, up top, right? Don't talk yourself off of players because of the weather, right? Like, I know that I've preached that in the past, but this week I didn't take my own advice, right? I changed my player pool there on Wednesday morning to account for the AM PM wave. So just going forward, I probably don't want to do that, right? Try and avoid that sort of thing. We'll have probably a better week if I do so. And then I suppose looking at the community contest, right, something to note there too. Guys like Sam Stevens, a little bit lower owned than I think I would have expected, right? So if we go back up to Nick's lineup here, right, 5.6%. Some of those like mega chalky pieces towards the top of the 7K range, maybe they're worth playing, right? If we're going to get ownership numbers a little bit lower there. And until next time, guys, best of luck with anything for the PGA Championship. I'll show you guys this. I'm already deep into the research on that end. We've got the GCSA up. We've been looking at some of the Fantasy National breakdown stuff. Worth noting that over the first two PGA Championships that they've played at Oak Hill, the scoring average was 3.41 over par. The average 4.84 bogeys per round. And I believe the cut line in 2003 was 9 over par, and the cut line there in 2013 was like 5-6 over par. So You're going to hear it a lot this week. I'm sure everyone's going to drill it into the back of your mind. This is going to be a beast of a golf course. And since the last time they played here in 2013, they've lengthened it about 500, 600 yards. So now it's 7,400 yards. It's a par 70, an absolute bear. Your average par 3 is 212. Your average par 4 is 450 yards. And there's only 2 par 5s, and they're about 600 yards long apiece. Not even reachable for a lot of the longer hitters. So I believe, by the way, you know how I said the bogey average was 4.8? Your birdie average, and again, this is for a major championship type of field, is 2.3 per round. 2.3. And just last week, right, Byron Nelson, it was 4.9 per round. And now we're looking at a 2.3 birdie per round average. I mean, it's my kind of golf course. It's going to be some good old carnage over the weekend. So make sure to keep an eye on those, right? If you're playing props, we'll be going over those over the weekend. But best of luck with those DFS lineups and any outrights you decide to go with.